Hi, as Bertie said, my name's Dave Cameron, unfortunately, and well, he's gone, isn't he? I work at the Department of Psychology and Sheffield Robotics, so I'm going to be mostly talking about what we can learn from robots and social robotics in particular. Now, for most people, robots in like the real world is kind of like this: a automated car manufacturing plant. But what we can see, there's basically none of this social stuff happening at all. There's like, if you really squint, there's two people right at the back. They are very far away from the robots. The robots are all caged off. There's basically what we call human-robot interaction. There's none of this happening at all. Social robotics is probably easier for most people to understand in terms of things like in science fiction films. So in the media, we see things like social robots such as these. We have Robot on the left from Robot and Frank, and Baymax from Big Hero 6 on the right. And these operate in a healthcare context. But say, unlike a automated delivery of penicillin or something like that, they are social robots because they are delivering their healthcare through social means. So they exist as companions, they offer advice, they check up much in the same ways like a doctor or medic might do. Of course, no robotics talk is ever complete without a picture of the T-800 and other modern horrors of robotics. And in its own way, the Terminator is a social robot. Yeah, I know. It's if you think that Arnold Schwarzenegger is going around the film pretending to be human, and he's in this relentless pursuit of Sarah Connor, is doing so in social means. He's finding people, speaking with them, trying to gather information. It is in its own way a social robot. Now, modern companies try to sort of emulate these sorts of robots, and come up with the ideas from sci-fi and look at what we can produce in the real world. Some of the real robots we have, some of the robots we have in our labs, we have the Xeno on the left here. There's a similar model to this one here. I'm not going to turn it on or do anything in the study because no one really wants to pay attention to me if the robot starts going. The work I do mostly is the Xeno robot. We built a little synthetic tutor, so a sort of teaching assistant that plays games with kids and is a bit educational. At the bottom on the right there, we have a Now robot. Our colleagues in Plymouth have built a sort of a physical therapist type robot for kids who have long stays in hospitals. And on the top right there, we have the Paro seal robot, not a humanoid, not human-based. It's a synthetic seal robot, but again, there's social interactions there. People play with it, they treat it as socially as if they would an animal. And that's used in dementia care, in care homes where, say, animals may not be appropriate to come in. Now, each of these robots are made by commercial companies with the idea that these are going to be released out fairly soon into the public, so you can just go out and buy these things. The capabilities are sort of still fairly rudimentary, and if you think sort of like home computing, like the sort of 60s, 70s sort of thing, that's the sort of level we've got in terms of the access, the capabilities, and the cost as well. The thing is, with the commercial companies making these, they are planning to release all of these out without having done sort of all the legwork in what that actually means. Should we be playing with these robots? Are they of any benefit? What's that going to mean for the future? And that's mostly what we look at in Sheffield Robotics. Some of the stuff, though, we use them as research tools, so I'm going to be talking about that today, if this works. There we go. So, robots in psychology. There are two main ways that we can use robots to actually learn in psychology. First off, we can build synthetic minds. We can get robots to create or perform tasks that we as humans do. And if we create a load of little processes that the robot has to work to be able to complete the bigger task, we have a reasonable good idea that if they match in some way the same sort of process that we think humans do, we might have a reasonable idea of what's actually happening in the human mind. Alternatively, we can use robots as research tools. That's mostly what I'll be talking about today. We can bring robots into the lab and have people interact with them and see what it's like. So I use robots in social psychology. Social psychology has really proud, long history of creating these massively fake situations and then dragging people into them to sort of reduce that really complicated part of any social interaction. There's so many different processes going on. Boil it down and create a sort of experiment level understanding. You want to look at just one process happening. These create weird situations, so you can measure people's aggression towards others by means of how much hot sauce they put on someone else's food just before they eat it. We have famous studies like the Milgram experiment, where you are asked to deliver dangerous electric shocks to people simply because a person in authority tells you to. And we have other like wonderfully named games like the Prisoner's Dilemma and so forth. So today we're looking at the idea if we create an imaginary experiment of the impact like emotional expression may have on trust. That's something that I've looked at a little bit in terms of how we trust other people. One of the key things there in our study would be creating a synthetic situation where you bring in participants from for your study and have people interact with this guy doing like a game of trust. The trouble is with that, to get it down to that precise experimental nature, you're going to need someone who's really able to precisely control your expressions. They're going to have to show, if we're measuring, like say, a particular expression, we want to have that actor actually do it properly. Any idea of the impression here? It's Clint Eastwood. Jim Carrey doing Clint Eastwood's fantastic. If you go, yeah, I know. I didn't want to be upstage, but moreover, if you're getting an experiment, you need people in. Tom's talked about 4 million participants or whatever. Social psychology has a history of about, say, 60. But even so, the actor that you've got in, they're going to have to do that same task, that same behaviour over and over again, just within conditions, just to make sure it's a fair test. And even some of the grandmasters in cinema find it really hard to do take after take after take of exactly the same performance. And that's just going to create noise and difficulty in your data to understand what you've actually even measured. And this is where social robots come in. A robot can offer both precision and perfect repetition. That's pretty much why we build robots. Expressive robots, such as Zeno here, in the picture there, well, they can create the same pictures and presentations over and over for each participant we have. We create a reliable study. Now, I haven't run this study, but friends over in MIT have done. They used the Nexi robot here, an expressive humanoid, in a game of trust. So they had a little getting to know you period with the robot when it was doing various actions, and then afterwards play a game of a simple game of trust. If you give the robot money, how much money will the robot give you back? And they found a variety of postures and expressions from the robot actually impact on how trustworthy they felt the robot to be. There were 4 particular behaviours that the robot was adversely impacted on trust. First off, if you put your hands together, particularly in like an evil sort of way, that is not a very trustworthy pose to be holding. Similarly, if you're touching the face, that's touching your face. Again, inhibits on trust. And if the folding the arms, it was folding the arms and sort of leaning back and leaning away. Now, you might have heard of like the folding the arms from like body language experts and so on. But the study revealed it's a lot more nuanced than that. Like folding the arms is not necessarily bad body language or untrustworthy body language. There could be millions of reasons why you fold your arms. You could just simply be cold, you could be copying someone else who's doing it, so forth. They found in the study that it's either the combination of these behaviours or these behaviours occurring very quickly in sequence impacts on trust. It had to be these working together. And it reduced trustworthiness in the robot by about 1/3, which is really quite a big amount considering the robot, has no sort of built-in personality or behaviours that would directly impact on its decisions for trust here. So this study is really cool, but it does rely on this massive assumption that people interacting with robots are some way going to interact similarly with other people, that you can effectively substitute a person for a robot in a psychology study. This is where a lot of my work's come in, because I've been looking at how people interact with robots, particularly how kids interact with robots. So we've got here in the promo video from RoboKind's, the people who make Xeno, kids cheerfully playing with a robot as a little home companion. And I've asked loads of kids about what they thought about playing with the robot, and almost all of them say it's absolutely amazing. But we saw so much variation in how they treated the robot and how they felt about working with it. And we started to see some patterns as well in terms of what they thought it was. So we wound up asking the kids, well, what is it? Is it like a machine? Is it like a person? Is it some sort of hybrid? Or is it something that I have no concept of? And if you ask enough kids these questions, you can sort of wind up developing like almost a continuum. You can go from more machine-like through to more person-like. And we found 2 major sort of outcomes of this. Kids aged about, say, 7 or 8 treat this Xeno robot as being somewhere between being a machine and being a person, ever so slightly more over onto the machine side. But it's this new sort of being, sort of a hybrid being between a machine like a car, or washing machine and so forth, and a living, breathing person with an identity almost. Younger kids, kids aged 6 and under, they were really, really keen on viewing the Xeno as being a person and being a friend of theirs very, very quickly as well. Now, this in itself is, again, I was saying about like artificial situations. This is something of an artificial situation its own. Not often do we go around classifying things as people or machines. So asking the kids, maybe I am perhaps leading them on a bit here. So we sort of opened it up a bit. We give kids interactions with robots, they play the games, and we say, well, okay, if you could ask Xeno anything you wanted at all in the whole world, what would you ask? It turns out kids have a huge variation in that. But if we ask enough kids enough questions, we can start seeing sort of patterns in the data here. So, does Santa give you presents? It's a very important question to ask a robot. It depends on whether Xeno's been good or not, I guess. What's your favourite colour? How do you have a bath? Do you have a pet? Do you have a robot pet or a living pet? Do you go to the doctors to get your wires checked? When were you made? Does it like being programmed without a say in what it does? That was a child of a philosophy professor. Were you programmed on JavaScript, Scratch, or Python? Why are you a boy and not a girl? Which, that's a fantastic one, I love that. When is your birthday? Do you have a sister? And my favourite, can you upgrade yourself to Windows 10? Kids obviously bought into the marketing campaign. And we ask enough kids enough questions on these things, and we start to see some patterns. You can group these all into themes of roughly similar ideas. And if we look at the the ones in red over on the side there, on the right, these are questions it's not weird at all to be asking another person. These are regularly sort of personable questions, whereas on the left here, we've got these sort of incredibly mechanical or procedural or programming related questions. These are not things we ask people. And in the middle there, in the purple, there is a sort of a weird mix. The kid, if we asked further the kid who said, how do you have a bath? Well, the reasoning for that question was, well, we all need to have a wash, but machines and electronics, they're not allowed to go in the bath. Presumably that's happened at home, they dropped the tablet or something. Which means this robot lives in a sort of grey area where the robot is either of these things. And we found as well that the pattern from before matches up. So the younger children tended to ask those questions further over with the smattering in the middle. And the older kids tended to ask the questions over here. So it gives us a general rough indication that kids are treating this robot either as a person or as a machine. But again, it is a little bit artificial. We've created a scenario where the kids are working with the robot in our parameters, and then being asked to ask a question to a robot is again somewhat artificial. So what happens if we have a robot in the wild? This robot, this robot was just sent out around in a shopping centre, sort of Johnny Five looking thing, and kids would do everything to it. They'd block its path. One kid standing around it for 20 minutes. The robot's programmed say, excuse me, could you get out my way, please? It's just on like a wayfinding course, just roaming around. They'd invite other kids to surround it, gang up on it, and sort of collectively hassle this robot, call it names, trying to hurt its feelings. Calling it stupid was very common. Even start attacking it with bottles and balls. The paper itself has things like the kids were trying to hit it as hard as they could. And the paper was about programming robots to detect these threats and then just try and make an escape from violent children. So, again, it sort of suggests that kids have this idea of that there's some sort of person or some sort of agent inside that robot that you don't... Yeah, sure, we might complain about a computer, we might even have a go at a computer because it's not doing what we want, but we're not trying to hurt its feelings, we're not trying to change what it does. But the kids are very clearly doing so to try and, well, as such, dominate this robot and control what it's doing and access that person within. So, for a robot that is something of a person, yet something of a person where you're happy to call it names, to try and stop it doing it. Like, the kids weren't just going around stopping people in the shopping mall, like collectively going round shoppers and trying to stop them from going round. So what makes it different? Is there a person in there? Is there part of a person in there? And what sort of interaction, what sort of behaviours, what sort of rights do we expect of this robot? What things do we grant it? Our friends over in Japan have done so. They've looked at what rights do children afford robots. So again, this is the same type of robot, a RoboV here. They're playing a game, a finding game with RoboV. So they had a little chat with a RoboV. It then taught them about, I think, the ocean and why we need to look after the ocean for a while. And then a little game of hide and seek, where the robot would then like take a little ball, hide it somewhere in the room, and then the kids go find it. And then the kids do the same for the robot. And the game's playing along quite nicely. The big twist in this study, though, is that halfway through, RoboV's kidnapped. Experimenters come in, they grab the robot starts going, oh, help me, no, no, no. They start dragging it away and then lock it in a cupboard. Have I got my... it's all gone. Yeah. They slam it and lock it in the cupboard. All the while, it's complaining about this. And the kids are then just left, okay, well, what did you think of that situation? These kids were what? Yeah, I know. They were aged a little older than the age group that I studied, so it's about 9 through to, I think, even 12, maybe 15. About what did you make of this? Now, does this violate Robo's rights? Most of the kids say yes, that was not an okay thing to do. You shouldn't be, manhandling the robots. It didn't want it to. And it was all justified because the robot should have at least been allowed its turn in the game. That wasn't fair. The RoboV didn't get nominally his go. When digging deeper, finding out what rights the children thought the robot could have, well, RoboV is a free person. 90% of the kids asked said RoboV could not be owned by another individual, much like you cannot own another person. RoboV, however, should not necessarily be paid for its work. The education stuff about the environment and the ocean, they said, well, if we made RoboV be a teacher, should it be paid? I think maybe this sort of speaks to, well, they didn't have any idea what the robot would do with money. So maybe if there was something, could it be paid in robot coins? Maybe that might sort of raise the rights there for this robot. Was it okay to keep RoboV in the cupboard for a couple of years? 75% say no about that one. On the justifications that, well, it might get lonely and it would be boring. And they're putting themselves in the robot's position. They're seeing that person and empathizing with a robot. Last on this, is it okay to recycle RoboV? 80% said no. Even if RoboV wasn't working and could be built to use for other parts, for other robots, the kids were like, no, you do not do that to people. Which, seems fair. My favourite, should RoboV be allowed to vote in the US election? Now this was, I believe, a study in Japan. So 33% say yes, RoboV should have suffrage, should be allowed to vote. And I guess the follow-up question is, would it have done a better job? Now, it's really weird to see across all these different studies, all these different ways that we've looked at things, all these different ways that different groups have looked at things, the kids start really seeing people inside this. This thing hasn't done anything. And when we have kids come up and look at the robot, they immediately want to start talking with it, playing with it, treating it like a person. And we have, the idea is that these are going to be in people's homes. These are going to be out there for kids as social companions at home at ages that it seems really clear that kids are learning about what it means to be a person. Now, earlier I compared these with like computers, like home computers and things, but these robots and such are different things. And I guess companies out there building these things, they're potentially creating a future where what it means to be a person might be changing. And that's changing for kids who are growing up now. Like us, it's probably fairly fixed. But I guess that really needs studying as soon as it can be done. That's what we need to be doing right now. Right, I think that's about everything there. So thank you all very much. I have a bonus little bit. Okay, has anyone seen this before? This is the Thatcher illusion. The Thatcher illusion is not the false belief that neoliberalism will lead to economic prosperity. This is an amazing picture. Here, can we tell any particular difference between these two photos? The smiles are horrific. Yeah, ready? Did we see it? I'll try it again. It should have stopped. Yeah. Yeah. Those eyes are nightmarish. This is, as far as I can see, first ever. It works with robots. It doesn't have to be a human face. These are, even for us, as sophisticated adults who know what people are and are not. Which is the upside down one? Which is the real one? Ready? Look at it. It tells us we treat these robots, we treat these things, they've got enough of a face to them that we go, yep, that's definitely a face, that's definitely a person. It really should be only going halfway around there, I'm sorry on that one. But it tells us we think these are, or we're so cued that these are people, these are humans. And that, I think, is just absolutely amazing. One last go. Right, okay, that's my actual finish. Right, questions?